Hello, everyone, and welcome. And I welcome you in joining us today as we talk through what continuous delivery is and the benefits of it, and how we think that WillowTree can help you achieve it on your organizations and on your product. Let's get started. Just to introduce myself, my name is Sue. I have been at WillowTree for 3.5 years now. I am a platform software engineer. I have led and managed multiple CI/CD processes for different client projects, as well as successfully implementing the shift left that we'll be talking about later.
And I am Matt Van Nuys. I'm a principal software engineer here. I've been at WillowTree for a little over 3 years. I've been Agile advocate for about 15 years, and I've helped many organizations, large and small, to implement better CD practices. So I want to talk a bit about what we'd like for you all to take away from today's presentation. These are the main three points that we want to make. The first one is that continuous delivery is not a large, arduous process set of rules or anything like that that you need to implement all at once. You can start small today and make incremental progress towards your continuous delivery practices. The second thing is that when you implement these things, everybody wins. Your clients, your teams are happier, your customers are happier, and it decreases your time to market, which helps your overall organizational performance. And the third point is that it takes a team. In order to be effective, continuous delivery really has to be bought in by every level of your organization, from executive leadership, management, and your delivery teams. So let's talk a little bit about who we are. WillowTree is a digital product agency, and we utilize these techniques we're going to share with you today to develop a breadth of different solutions, whether it's mobile apps, websites, voice. We do a wide spectrum of different things for our clients. And we are very proud to partner with some of the world's most well-known brands. And we consider an honor and a privilege to work on some products that are really core to their business and be able to utilize some of these techniques to launch different applications and do things for them where it really matters most. And we try to apply these techniques across the entirety of the product lifecycle, from strategy to design to development and growth marketing opportunities. But that's enough talking about us. Let's talk a little bit about the format of this webinar today.
Yeah, before we get started, we'd like to invite you to interact with us on Zoom. Zoom has some really cool capabilities for the attendees to interact with us. We will be putting up some occasional interactive polls that we think that are going to greatly enhance your experience with the content. And please feel free to ask any questions through the Q&A. We will be answering them as they queue up at the end of the presentation. So yeah, keep them coming. Yeah, and now let's get started with the content. And as Matt mentioned, today we'll be focusing on what continuous delivery is and what we think the three core pillars of how to achieve continuous delivery is, and how we think it will lead to an increase in your organization's performance.
And if you have any questions about the discussion points that we have, any of the data that we're using, a good portion of it comes from this book that we're showing here, Accelerate, by Nicole Forsgren, Jez Humble, and Gene Kim. This is a book that came out a couple of years ago. It's a really easy read, 4 or 5 hours, and you can make it through it. But it's one of those books that you'll spend the next couple of weeks really unpacking the data contained within the book. It's a really great resource where they surveyed 2,000 unique organizations across a breadth of industries, different size IT orgs, and we're able to come up with some really good metrics on how to gauge the organizational performance of high-performing and low-performing IT organizations.
Yeah, last time I checked, I think it was about $10 on Amazon. And if you want to add another collection of books to your Kindle library that you'll never read, like me, I'm just kidding. You really should read this book. It's really beneficial, I think. And what we're talking about today will make a lot more sense, and it will be in much more meaningful ways, I think, if you read this book together. So please go ahead and check it out. It is an amazing book. And also, because we're curious, we'd like you to participate in a poll, which we will be revisiting later in the presentation.
So you should
Do you see
see
the
a poll pop up now. And as Sue said, we will talk about the results of this poll a little later on in the presentation.
All right, so to continue with continuous delivery, before we define what continuous delivery is, I want to talk about why it's absolutely crucial for your organization to get this right, especially during this time where COVID has really disrupted our entire way of operating.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was at Home Depot last weekend. One of my wife and I's COVID goals was to clean out and organize our garage, and so I needed to buy some shelving. And that visit to Home Depot got me thinking. They have completely had to restructure how the engagement with their customers and the employee engagement with the customers works. They had these lines outside where everything was spaced 6 feet apart, and they had employees at the entrance and the exit to control the flow of customers through the store. Everything was marked 6 feet apart. They had certain aisles closed down where you wouldn't be able to get through the aisle safely and maintain social distancing. And it just got me thinking that a lot of the things that used to be within your control as an organization and as an employee or as a customer are all of a sudden outside of your control. The way that you interact both internally and externally has been forced to fundamentally change basically overnight. So we see continuous delivery as a key element to helping your organization adjust to this rapid changing environment that we find ourselves in now.
And continuous delivery comes with just real benefits. With continuous delivery, you will see your software quality increase and your failure rates decrease. And we'll be sharing some metrics on this later on. And you will be delivering products much faster to your customer. So did you know that Facebook delivers every 1.3 minutes? Crazy. And you'll also have your team who is in the development cycles experience much less frustration, and you'll be able to let your customer feel like their voice is really heard in meaningful ways. And luckily for us, Jez Humble, who is one of the authors of the book that we just mentioned, and he is also one of the pioneers of continuous delivery, he gave us this really good definition of continuous delivery.
Yeah, Jez says that continuous delivery is the ability to get changes of all types, including new features, configuration changes, bug fixes, and experiments into production or into the hands of users safely and quickly in a sustainable way. So what we really want to unpack is, what does safe, quick, and sustainable look like? Well, we can look at the restaurant industry right now for inspiration. The way that local restaurants have had to shift their entire business models and adapt to the new world highlights one of the key points that we talk about with continuous delivery. Generally speaking, continuous delivery is more of a cultural and mental shift than it is a technological one.
Yeah, I have this one restaurant in town that everybody talks about. It's amazing. It's really hard to get reservations, honestly, because of that and due to its fine dining kind of aspect. I've been a little too intimidated to go in, and I had never gone until actually since COVID started, and they had to shut down their dining hall and had to shift their entire business model to incorporate not in dining, but for external clients. So they had to, well, safely, because they want to keep their employees safe as well as the patrons. So they had to start using an online system for ordering. And because it's an online system, it just almost happens instantaneously. And they now can keep their business sustainable because they can keep their employees under payroll, and the local community is also still getting their business. So it's just really inspiring how the restaurant industry has been able to adapt to this tragedy. But that's all really amazing. But how about the rest of the industry? And I'd like to share some incredible metrics around that.
So these numbers, we have some references at the bottom here to where they were extrapolated from, but these are pretty incredible when you think about this. Facebook, as Sue mentioned before, deploys on average every 1.3 minutes. Netflix every 38 seconds, and Amazon every 11.7 seconds. And these are just kind of mind-blowing numbers. And we're not going to sit here and say that every single business is built like Netflix, Amazon, or Facebook and has this same need for this level of delivery. But there is a lot to be learned from this. And I think there is a large difference between a company like Netflix or Amazon adjusting to situations like this versus a delivery process that takes 3 to 6 months, where if you approach your customers and say, we know that situations have changed, we'll get to it and we're working hard on it, but you don't deliver for 3 months, think of how much the world has changed in the past 3 months, and you could be missing the boat if you're continuously working 3 to 6 months behind.
And now we have an idea of what continuous delivery is. Let's start talking about how you and your organization could achieve it. And let's start with the obvious. What changes can you make in how you and your organization delivers your software? And it seems somewhat counterintuitive, but pain management is key.
You know, one of the things that we always say with pain management is if it hurts, do it more often. And it's not that we're masochists or anything, it's that the most painful pieces of your delivery process are probably the things that you need to practice over and over again in order to find ways to optimize them. I always use this anecdote of when my wife and I were in college and she had a toothache. And it wasn't super bothersome to her at first. We were poor college students at the time and just kind of ignored it. We didn't have insurance or anything. And so we thought it might just go away, but it didn't. It grew and grew in pain level until she went to the dentist and found, and the dentist told her that, you know, it was a cavity, but that has taken root and it's infected, and now you need a double root canal. And obviously that was much more costly, much more painful in the long run. Whereas if we would have just addressed that earlier, then we would have been much better off. And our software delivery practices are very similar in that way.
I'll also take 2 cavities over 1 root canal, please. But the main takeaway here is really that you need to break the pain points in your product into smaller and easier to manage chunks, which in turn creates this really nice, tighter feedback loop to go through this build, measure, and learn cycle over and over and over again. And in the end, practice will help you create this perfect product. I mean, just look at Steph Curry. I'm sure he has practiced his shoots a million times, and I'm sure he's failed in the middle a couple times. I'm sure he learned how to not do things a million times, and you know, in the end, that practice makes perfect.
And one of the really interesting things is the study that they performed in Accelerate, and the metrics they were able to pull really pointed in this direction. So they were able to look at these top 3 metrics as really strong ties to high delivering organizations. So the highest performing organizations were able to deploy on demand, potentially multiple times a day. The time it took for them to take any specific feature, bug, or anything from the point that reaches a developer, so the implementation phase all the way into production, was less than an hour. the recovery time when failures did happen, less than an hour. And when you take all of those components together, what's really interesting is you would think intuitively, and a lot of people think that, oh, it's so risky to deploy that often. You're just, any one of those could be a failure. But we actually see a decrease in failure rate for people that deploy multiple times a day. And the reason for that is exactly what we were just talking about. They've gone through that process of really smoothing out that delivery process to the point where they are comfortable in delivering. They've practiced it enough to feel comfortable doing it.
Yeah, and I think this is probably a perfect time to revisit that poll from earlier. And if you remember what you answered, maybe compare yourself on the scale. Does this reflect a reality within your org? It says that if you deploy multiple times a day, you may have a failure rate between 0 to 15%. If it's months to every 6 months, 16 to 30%. It looks like it was a really even spread. So the organizations that deploy 1 to 2 times per month or 3 to 6 times per month, you could start deploying multiple times per day and see a failure rate of 0 to 15%. I think if this is something that we could all reflect on and see how and where we could reduce our failure rates by deploying more frequently and practicing continuous delivery.
Yeah, so something that we often hear is this assumption that if I move quickly, it's going to increase my risk because I'm not going to do all the same quality checks that I'd normally do. And sometimes that's true. You don't want to move so quickly that quality suffers. But a lot of times, if you are moving in that direction, what you're really doing is sacrificing time that you could be delivering value with instead queuing things up to the point where you are having to take an extended amount of time to improve quality. But what would happen if you were to build quality in the development cycle? And in our definition of quality, we're not just talking about your QA team and your test engineering team and your test suite. We're also talking about things like security and analytics and everything that delivers a great customer experience to your end users. So a great example of this is with security. A good number of projects and products that we work on tend to view security as a last step gate in order to get something to production. We have to run security scans. We have to do a security audit in order to get this piece of code out into production. But what happens if you find these major problems? Say you find a major security problem with your application. All of a sudden you are in a highly stressful situation where you may not be able to deliver, you have to push back a deadline, or a product fails altogether in the worst case scenario. So we want to ease that. We want our delivery process to be something to be celebrated. We don't want to have this high pressure situation. So if we were to build that into our development cycle, we might be able to ease that. And just to highlight this kind of quality versus speed kind of dichotomy, I guess, is this example of a company called TikTok Track. So TikTok Track is a company that manufactures smartwatches for kids. I believe they're an Australian company. And they decided, they made a conscious decision in their desire to go speed to market that they had developed this product, and at the end, they were going to do their security audit. They made a conscious decision to forego the security audit and release the product in order to try to capture the market. And it turned out to be a very poor choice because a security researcher very quickly discovered that you could actually enumerate all the customers in their database and essentially take control of any device as an anonymous user. And that included geolocation services for children, being able to send messages and voice recordings and actually speak like a walkie-talkie kind of a system with any user in the system. And this is a kid's smartwatch. It ended up, they had to remove the product from the market and shut down their service in order to fix this issue. And it was because of that process that they did so. So we want to work diligently to not be the next TikTok track.
Yeah, really. Let's not be the next TikTok track. And now that we know not to be TikTok track, let's find out how to not be TikTok track. And at WoolyTree, we use a process called shift left, which we think is a major benefit in making sure that quality is prioritized. And shift left, if you haven't heard of it before, is a process used throughout the industry, and it is mainly referred in software testing, where it's advocated that the testing should be done earlier in the cycle. But really, the general idea of just do things early should and can apply to every step of the software development cycle. It can apply to planning, development, QA, UAT, and security. And if, just like Matt said, if TikTok Track had actually applied their security assurances earlier on the project, they probably would have caught it in their first, second, third iteration of their development, and probably would have been able to come up with a solution to fix the problem and not have to deal with it at the very end. And with shift left, it really encourages teams to work in parallel and work in slices. And this shift left process really sets up the work to encourage collaboration. In this case, again, planning, development, QA, so that cross-team communication is being done smoothly. Everybody is participating in all the important communications and ideation, and it really just encourages work to be done in parallel and not in sequence. And really, in the end, it comes with changing the way you think about what is done. Like, when are we done? Is it when the engineers merge the code into the code base, or is it when the test engineers verify the feature, when it's deployed to the app store, but not in the hands of the users? What is it?
Yeah, I like to think about things when we talk about what done means in terms of treating our software like a perishable good. So if we think about things in that way, I use this analogy of a grocery store that's selling produce. They have this cabbage on the shelf, and a grocery store is not going to consider it uh, a success and done when that cabbage hits the shelf. That cabbage is going to sit there on the shelf, and if it's not in a customer's hands, it's going to mold and rot. And no grocery store wants to be serving moldy cabbage to their customers. And if we start thinking about our software that way, our software has no intrinsic value of its own. We need to get it in the hands of users, be able to test that build, measure, learn cycle, so that we understand the value that we're providing to our users. So if we're just waiting with that software on a shelf, we're basically treating it like moldy cabbage by the time it gets to our customers a lot of times. And that's not the place that we want to be at.
So now that we know all the really great ways to achieve continuous delivery, how can we incorporate these into the actual software delivery? And Matt, I'd like to ask you a question, and I feel like this is a pretty easy answer, but let's see. Which of the next two options you think will ensure that we can keep and develop and release a software better and faster? And let's say that this is a hypothetical feature that is a redesign of a button that is used throughout the product. Option one, the test engineering team will perform manual regression of the whole product that takes 2 weeks to complete. Option two, developers will run the fully automated regression test suite that takes a whole 15 minutes to run completely. I feel like the answer is pretty easy.
I don't know. It's really kind of 50-50, but I think I'd take option B.
Yeah, so it's pretty obvious that machines can run things much faster and more reliably than humans can. And this is where automation comes in. And it can help us do tasks that could take 2 weeks in 15 minutes for humans. And automation really comes in various shapes and sizes. I'm sure you've heard of automated tests. I mean, engineers run them all the time, but that is not the only automation that can be done. And there's a story of an engineer that I heard a while back that I really love. Apparently, they wrote a script for a coffee machine to automatically start making his coffee when he would walk right through the door so he could save 30 seconds of his morning routine. And as silly that is, but that is a great example of automating your daily routine and the tasks that you do so that you don't have to spend your manual time on it.
Yeah, it's Sue makes a really good point that we talk about automation a lot in terms of just software testing and our automated test suite and everything like that. But automation extends to many different areas of your organization. You know, how are you doing your risk assessments, your change management process? Is there room for automation within that? And I think that's a really powerful gateway to being able to shrink that time frame down if you just think creatively about these other areas of your organizations that you might be able to automate.
And software delivery is just really a single facet of achieving continuous delivery. For a successful implementation of continuous delivery, not only is the way you deliver software going to have to change, but really the culture around delivering the software is going to have to change together for a successful continuous delivery. And here's what it really boils down to. Cross-functional collaboration needs to be encouraged and rewarded. Any attempts to silo knowledge within departments or teams have to be discouraged. And this is because good cross-functional collaboration leads to a culture of shared responsibility. And when you have shared responsibility, you have increased happiness and higher levels of success within your teams and in your product.
Yeah, I mean, it's really basic human nature says that people will support what they help create. And it turns out there's a lot of work and research done in this by a famous sociologist named Ron Westrum. And he came up with Westrum's cultural model that describes three different types of organizational cultures. The first one is a pathological or a power-oriented culture, um, kind of the Game of Thrones of business, where you have large silos between your different departments. There's not a lot of cooperation. Sometimes there's even animosity between various departments. And in that environment, it's very difficult for anyone to be able to innovate and grow for fear that they'll be shot down or that if they try to talk to this other department, oh, they hate us, they're never going to agree to this, you know, so on and so forth. And that makes for a very difficult culture for trying to deliver anything. The next one is what I call the Bill Lundgren, or the bureaucratic culture. And in this one, we start to see some cooperation between various departments. But again, coming up with really great ways to improve processes and move forward and experiment is by and large discouraged, because the rules dictate that you can't do thing X. Now, we're not saying that bureaucracy itself is altogether bad, but do the rules serve to help you grow your culture and help you to really deliver quickly? In a rule-oriented culture, a lot of times the experimentation piece of it becomes so burdensome that you know, if I have a great idea, I may not even get it off the ground because I'm like, oh, I have to coordinate with these 5 different teams in our change management process, and procurement is going to take, you know, a year. I can't even get this thing off the ground. I'm just going to forget about it for a while, and that really leads to stifling of innovation. And really where we want to move is what Westrum calls a generative or performance-oriented culture, where there's a high level of cooperation between your teams. You know, instead of there being barriers to entry, experimentation is encouraged, bridging is encouraged between your teams. And it's really about making your performance goals and metrics and things public and available so that everyone feels a sense of involvement in the delivery of your product.
And with these cultural models now in mind, I would like to challenge you guys in a series of introspective questions for yourselves and your teams and organizations. How often do your business and product units interact with your engineering team or any other team really in a highly collaborative way? And how would you or your organization react to having a major security flaw, just like TikTok Track, if it was discovered by one of your engineers? Do your customers and your teams have a clear path of moving innovation from all the way from inception to realization? And if you couldn't answer all these in time, don't worry. We'll be sending out a questionnaire with some of the same questions after the presentation. And we want to see how we can help you move your non-generative model to a generative model.
And the final pillar that we want to talk about here is dealing with identity. And what we mean by identity in this context is the identity that you as an employee feel with your organization. And this can be from the highest level executive leadership, managerial leadership, your delivery teams themselves. How do they identify with the organization? And what we've discovered is that happy employees lead to more productive employees. And this got highlighted to me a while back. I was working with a colleague who made this great little anecdote where he said, I feel like, and this was during a really challenging time in one of the projects we were working on. He came to me and said, I just feel like a stone mover. There's this big pile of rocks over here. I didn't get to have any say in how heavy the rocks are or where they're going. I'm just being asked to pick up this rock and move it from point A to point B. I don't get to say what the path is or anything like that. It's just pick up rock, put it over here. It's almost like the Planet Fitness commercials from the early 2000s with the guy that I pick things up and I put them down. And it just wasn't very fulfilling. He felt kind of demoralized with the work that he was doing. And so we don't want to be stone movers. We don't want people to feel like their voice isn't heard and that their voice really doesn't matter within the products that we're building. And some ways to identify this is how are you empowering your teams? Are you listening to feedback? Are you having a forum for your teams to deliver feedback and make sure that everyone's voice feels heard? Are you just handing down requirements, or are your delivery teams involved in being able to shape some of those things? And that's really what we want to watch out for there. The other big thing is that the diversity of your teams really matters.
And hopefully this is not a surprise to many of you. It is a known fact that diversity matters for both the teams and for products. And it's pretty obvious if you think about it, right? If you have more unique ideas coming from more unique people, that creates more room for innovation. And in the end, that will just make more room for great products. And you really can only have diverse opinions if you have diverse teams. And again, studies have shown time and again that diverse teams perform better as a collective intellectual being and financially. So it's absolutely imperative that organizations prioritize the representation of underrepresented groups in STEM and promote inclusive environments, if not for the team's happiness, but because it really means that it will create better products in the end.
And we'd like to just summarize the three key takeaways and hope that you all have really seen some of the benefits that we've been talking about here today. So the first one, again, is you can start this now. You don't have to bite off this giant arduous process. You can start small, work on the most painful things, and just kind of build up from there. Continuous delivery is all about iteration and getting better over time. So you can start doing that today. And you know, I hope we've shown that everybody wins. You know, your teams will be happier, your customers will be happier. You have a decreased time to market. So there's a direct financial impact there to your organization. And then the last one, which is very important, is it takes a team. Transformation doesn't happen as a top-down dictation. It happens based on excited representation through all levels of your organization. So I think with that, we will open it up to Q&A. I haven't checked if we have any open questions here or not. It looks like we have a couple of questions in chat. Patrick said weekly wasn't an option. Yeah, I apologize for that. I would consider weekly as mostly on demand. I guess it all depends on definition, but if you're doing weekly releases, you're doing a really fantastic job there. John Doe says, what does failure usually look like for your deployments? I think that's a really good question. Failure can take a lot of shapes and sizes. I mean, there's obviously catastrophic failures, you know, thing completely failed to deploy and we had to roll back. There are always the insidious failures of we deployed this thing and then a week later we figure out that there's a major problem that was introduced and we have to go through a rollback scenario or something along those lines. But I think failure is really a success and failure comes from the outcomes that you expect as a team. So that should really be part of kind of your product and your team's definition. So what does a successful product look like? What does success itself look like? And if you use outcomes to drive that, you can have some direct measurables. And the important part there is being able to have actual measurable performance metrics that are accessible to the team, to management, and basically like publicly or semi-publicly accessible so that you can measure the success and failure of any given release. That's a really good question.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, sorry. One of the biggest things about working in shift left is a great example of vertical development. And one of the main key points of vertical development is that the team and the clients all come up with a golden path of what success might look like at the very beginning, so that individual teams and participants in this product are all aligned on what is most important to the team and the clients. And it definitely, working in these vertical slices help everyone to be aligned on the same page.
John Doe also asked, what are some strategies to encourage constructive discussions between technical and business groups? I would say that an area that we found great success here is if you haven't read Dune, read Dune. It's great. There's also a Dune movie coming out if you're not much of a reader. And it will be better than the 80s one. Anyway, yeah, so strategies to encourage constructive discussions between technical and business groups. I think in a lot of cases and in a lot of businesses, it's just giving people opportunities to do that, to set up forums where it's a safe space and it feels safe. So a lot of this comes with we do a process called norming, and we will bring business stakeholders and all the necessary people into the same room together and just discuss, you know, at the very beginning and say, what are your expectations for this? A little bit of that golden path definition that Sue was talking about, you know, how do you see the success of this product? What does that mean? And we even talk about, like, personally, what do you want to achieve within this product or within a specific set of work? And going through that exercise and just norming with that entire group and creating that cross-functional collaboration where it feels like a safe space, um, is really key to success there. And sometimes that involves making some tough choices about whether or not, say, a management person should actually be in a conversation. You know, will someone be able to truly speak their mind if they feel like their manager is in there watching them? You know, in some organizations, that's totally fine. And in some organizations, it's like, well, I may not feel fully comfortable with that. So it's really gauging your teams and coming up with that norming experience where everyone feels comfortable bringing those discussion points up.
All right. I think we will wrap up Q&A since we are running out of time.
Yeah, so we really wanted to leave you all with some tools that are available to you. So Sue mentioned earlier kind of this cultural model survey, and we'll send this out to you after the presentation here. And if you're interested at all in kind of figuring out what it means to move from a specific cultural model to a more generative cultural model, take the survey and we'll process the results and try to help you with that process. We'll also be posting a blog that kind of has the key takeaways and some of the finer points of the webinar right after this. So you can check out that blog post. We'll be sending that around in follow-up here. And then one thing we've been trying to develop, it's not quite ready yet, but within the next couple of weeks, we'd love to share with you all a worksheet that we've been developing on some continuous delivery kind of best practices where you can get started, and just some, they're kind of like guideposts to prompt you and be able to help you as you take this journey through your continuous delivery path. So hopefully that will help you. If you have any questions at all, feel free to get in touch with us. We'll provide details on how to do that. But I hope you all found this interesting. I am always open to discussions on this. This is kind of a passion of mine. So if you have any questions at all, feel free to send them my way and I will do my best to answer them. I appreciate you all your all's time. And hope you found this valuable. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.